we've got a 9-game NBA slate on the books tonight, so here to help us make sense of it are DraftKings contributors Nick Friar, Matt Meiselman, and Garion Thorne.
All right, fellas, we want your best DFS plays in each price range. Let's get the party started with the best guard north of $7,500. Who is your dude, Nick?
So I'm going to take steal a little thunder from Gary, and I'm assuming he's going to go with Fred VanVleet. I know he was talking about him yesterday, and he is the model of consistency. Well, I'm just assuming Gary, and understandably so. This guy has been rock solid for the better part of this month. Going up against the Hawks, I know they're both on the second leg of a back-to-back. But if Trae Young does play tonight, I know he was questionable going into last game, ended up being a game-time decision. Did go. Whether or not he plays tonight, we don't know. But if he plays tonight, then it gives him better odds to go off, to have a ceiling game, excuse me. And Karis LeVert's another guy I like too at 8.4K going up against the Bulls too. Anytime that he's the only guy available of Indy's top 4 players, I think he's a guy you have to consider. And Chicago is on the second leg of a back-to-back. So another thing that's going to help him tonight, and they don't particularly do well against opposing guards. In this game has the second highest total on DraftKings Sportsbook. So I like Fred VanVleet more, but Karis LeVert's another good option too.
All right, Maddie, where are you going here?
I'm going to go with a guy who didn't play yesterday. I think this is going to be a day where we have a ton of news. There's a lot of guys who are questionable now, and I think many more will be added to the injury report. This is just kind of a chaotic day, it seems. But DeJounte Murray for the Spurs didn't play yesterday. They're on the second game of a back-to-back today, and I think there's a chance they give different guys a day off. Murray's dealing with a wrist injury, but I think it was more of a rest day. They had a tough game against the Warriors 2 nights ago. Front end of back-to-back, they probably don't want him playing 2 nights in a row if anything's bothering him, which is kind of how it seemed. So I think Murray gets back out there tonight, and maybe Derek White doesn't play. He's another player the Spurs have been kind of cautious with. But either way, Murray has a tremendous matchup against the Houston Rockets, who probably are the best team to face both for winning basketball games and for DFS in the NBA. So even if White is out there with Murray, I think Murray has plenty of opportunity to do really well. That would just be a bonus if White ends up getting the night off too. So really good spot for all the Spurs, but I think Murray's my favorite.
Gary, and Nick says you're going with Fred. Can you confirm?
I mean, generally speaking, I would. But building off what both these guys were talking about, I think there are some real red flags on this slate. And we still got 5 injury reports to be submitted, so a lot can change between now and tip-off. But when you're talking about the Raptors in particular, this is a team that, due to the schedule realignment because of some of the postponed games, this is not only their 4th game in 5 nights, coming off an overtime game against Chicago last night, but their previous game before this 4 games in 5 night stretch was a triple overtime game against the Heat. I think under any normal circumstances, like VanVleet, Siakam would just get a night off tonight. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen because that has not been Nick Nurse's IO. That's not really Fred VanVleet's IO either. But it is a little concerning they have to be getting tired at some point. So I think there is going to be some weird stuff to kind of keep an eye on in this slate, and the Raptors would be a team to watch just because the minutes totals have been so high. So I'll play it a little bit safer. I'll just go with Luka Doncic, who is not playing on the second night of a back-to-back, but has been playing insane amounts of minutes lately. I mean, more than we would expect for Luka Doncic during the regular season. He's played 37 minutes per game across his last 9 games. He's averaging more than 1.6 DraftKings points per minute in that span of time. And he's gone over 70 DraftKings points 4 times within that same stretch, because when someone that good is playing that many minutes, they're just going to put up some insane totals.
All right, let's move on to a forward over 7,500 that you like, Matt. 2 guys in this price range who are out, so 8 guys to choose from.
Yeah, the other team, it's kind of on the same theme to what Garion's talking about. The team that I think is most likely to rest players tonight is the Chicago Bulls. Now, DeMar DeRozan, who I do like if, let's say, Zach LaVine is out, he may sit too. So this pick may just wind up being totally different because the Bulls will be playing like a skeleton team compared to their normal team. But assuming that Zach LaVine is the one guy who sits because he's the one who's had the back problem, DeRozan becomes really, I think, an elite option at 9,500. The Bulls are going against the Pacers, who ordinarily are not a very good defensive team. They're also missing all of their big men potentially. We still have Goga Batadze and O'Shea Brissett, who are questionable, but those are backup bigs for them anyway. Like all the starting frontcourt players, most notably Miles Turner, are out for the Pacers. So this becomes a really bad defensive team. DeRozan could sit too, but assuming he plays and LaVine doesn't, that means more usage for DeRozan, more time with the ball, more stats across the board for him. So this is definitely a game we really have to monitor as far as what the Bulls decide to do in terms of rest. But if we get DeRozan out there without LaVine, then maybe he does deserve to be the highest priced player on this slate.
Yeah, DeRozan will be 9,500 in that spot. Garion, who's a forward over 75K that you like?
Yeah, I'm going to echo what Matt's talking about. I think it's DeMar DeRozan. I think he's the top option, and I'm pretty confident he's going to play. I mean, he was the one who was given a night off on Monday to start this sort of insane stretch the Bulls are about to undertake in the next 2-3 weeks. So I think he's already got his rest day in. LaVine mentioned post-game that his back really was bothering him in that Raptors contest. It seems like Billy Donovan all but admitted that he will probably get the night off tonight. Something to watch for still, but so far this season, DeRozan goes from being a 30% usage player to a 35.8% usage rate in the over 700 minutes he's played without Zach LaVine this season. And DeRozan in general is just in the midst of a really good run right now. His last 8 games, he scored over 45 DraftKings points in each and every one of those contests. He's averaging well over 1.3 DraftKings points per minute, which is amazing production considering he's not really elite in any category aside from scoring. I mean, he chips in with rebounds, he chips in with assists, but that's like peak level DeMar DeRozan production. So if LaVine's not going to play tonight against the Pacers of all teams, I mean, the Pacers are basically, they've supplanted the Hornets as the best possible DFS matchup in the Eastern Conference. Across their last 10 games, they have the second worst defensive rating in basketball, and they operate at the 5th fastest pace. So that is just a dream matchup for someone like DeRozan.
Nick, you echoing what these guys are saying?
Yeah, I'm in lockstep with these guys. Although I will say, look, LaVine, we expect he's not going to play tonight. If by some chance he does, I still do like DeMar DeRozan in this spot because since LaVine has returned, one thing we've seen kind of hike up as much as his points have gone down, his fantasy points have stayed up because he's distributing the ball really well too, taking advantage of LaVine and, of course, and Vucevic being in the lineup. You guys talked about how bad Indy is defensively, and this is the second highest total on DraftKings Sportsbook tonight. Another guy I do like, though, if you're looking for someone a little bit cheaper in this range, over 7.5K, Evan Mobley is another guy, too, going up against Charlotte. Garion mentioned before, if Indy's not the best team to target defensively or from a DFS purpose, Charlotte's probably the best team. And you always have to consider guys who are playing against them, and they don't do particularly well against opposing big men. So I still like DeRozan as my number one, but I think Mobley is a guy who, if you're looking in that 7K range, you can save a little bit there.
All right, Garion, let's go to center here, north of 7K, one that's catching your eye. We see the two guys who absolutely own this league in Jokic and Embiid. One of them in a better spot. You want to save some cash here?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you have Luka in a lineup, like I've suggested, you probably can't have one of those guys. So I won't cheat here. I'll take someone who's like, quote unquote, affordable. And perfect segue from what Nick was talking about. I think Evan Mobley is a fantastic target, especially considering there might be a better target at this position on the Cavaliers. But by the rules of this game, I can't talk about him. Kevin Love at 6,900.
Oh my God.
But Evan Mobley, $7,600 coming off arguably the best offensive game of his career. I mean, career high 29 points. Had a 33% usage rate. I mean, there's no guards left on the Cavaliers roster, and Garland's out again tonight. So I think you look at someone like Mobley, who really has a diverse skill set. I mean, he's someone who can facilitate and kind of play point forward for this Cavaliers team. I mean, Charlotte's not the Rockets, but they're also pretty close to being the Rockets when we come to look at DFS matchups. So I think Mobley's in a fantastic spot, but, you could also save with Kevin Love.
All right, cool. Nick, what's your strategy here?
Someone's trying to get those Kevin Love picks out early before we get to that part of the show because maybe other people are going to pick Kevin Love. But either way, I think that's a good call. Obviously, Mobley as well. But if you're looking at Embiid or Jokic tonight, if you're trying to pick between those two, I would go with Embiid. Dallas does not handle big men well without Porzingis. We talked about that earlier in the week with Wendell Carter Jr., Serge Ibaka. Both have had double-doubles recently. There have been other guys too. So I like him if you're picking between the two. If you're trying to save more, because I think there's plenty of good options tonight, just in general in the 8K range, Christian Wood is my favorite tonight going up against the Spurs. He's had a great month. His lone hiccup came against the Spurs a little recently, but he also had a good game against them this month too. This is the highest total on DraftKings Sportsbook tonight. Even if Hurdle does play, I still like him in this matchup because the Spurs generally don't do as well against bigs. If Hurdle does play, he makes it even better. Regardless, I also like his points prop over 20.5 on DraftKings Sportsbook as well.
Matt, how much money are you planning on spending here at the 5?
Yeah, I think I'm going to spend the 12.3 on Joel Embiid. So to start with, I do have to mention Nikola Vucevic, because if we get the situation where Levine and DeRozan rest, now we have to move over to Vucevic. So there's a lot going on with the Bulls, but Embiid is a much more stable pick. I think the Sixers should have all their guys playing. And I think this is it's similar to what I've said on many other occasions when we have Embiid and Jokic both on the slate. I think this comes down to ownership, and I think more people like playing Nikola Jokic. He contributes in more statistical categories, and he has what seems on paper to be a better matchup against the New Orleans Pelicans. But I do think it's a good point that without Kristaps Porzingis, Embiid does maybe have a sneaky good matchup going against some of these backup Dallas bigs. So it might be, at the very least, it's a better matchup than it normally would be against the Mavericks. And Embiid's a little bit cheaper. You get $100 off of Jokic. But to me, if you're paying up for someone, I think Embiid is the guy that's worth it.
All right, Nick, who's your favorite mid-range play? Talking a guy between 5 and 7,500.
I think this guy was talked about already on the show. I could be wrong, but Kevin Love tonight. I think that's a pretty good pick. Yeah.
Someone sneezed his name.
Yeah, it was weird. It was weird, but he's at 6.9K tonight going up against Charlotte. We talked about before with Evan Mobley. Anytime that you have a bigs going up against Charlotte, any quality bigs, you got to be considering them. And honestly, I like Kevin Love more than I like Evan Mobley tonight because of the value. And they've been, Kevin Love's been producing 40-plus DK fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 outings. The one hiccup came against Detroit when he only played 19 minutes. So this is a guy who's putting up better, similar numbers to Mobley right now in terms of fantasy production. So I'd rather roll with him if I'm going to roll with one of the two. And then Marcus Smart's another guy I like going up against Detroit on the second leg of a back-to-back at 5.7K. And then Patty Mills, if James Harden doesn't play at 5.6K. He's not on the injury report right now, but we know that Harden things pop up with him last minute. So if he does pop up, Patty Mills is another guy.
Garion, are you going to roll with your boy Kevin Love here?
Well, I mean, we've already talked so much about him.
Oh, sure.
Probably go a different direction here for the Peoples. I mean, we've talked a lot about this Bulls game, and I think we've mentioned guys we think might not play. One guy I can assure you who will play is Ayo Dosunmu, who just never leaves the court for the Bulls. And it's really important to realize that, we're talking about, well, will DeRozan play? Will Levine play? Who steps up? The Bulls don't have a bench already. I mean, this is a team that is playing like Matt Thomas 10 minutes a night because they just have to. So if Levine's not there, if DeRozan's not there, if both aren't there, Dosunmu is already leading the team, averaging 38 minutes per game across his last 11 contests. He's not a huge scorer, but he contributes in every category. And I think he would have to take on more of a shot burden if one or two of those guys are not playing. So at $5,600, especially in a tier where, depending on what happens with the Spurs, like I think Derek White could be a really, really popular play just because the Rockets are such an enticing matchup. But Dosunmu is just going to have a level of volume that I don't think a lot of the assets within this particular price range are going to have tonight.
All right, Matt, who are you rolling with in this price range?
I'll go with someone else, but I do just want to mention Dosunmu could potentially be really, really good now because Kobe White is now questionable as of like 3 minutes ago. So yeah, that's going to help a lot too, especially if Levine is out, who is also questionable. I'll switch to a different team though, because we've spent a lot of time on the Bulls. The Utah Jazz are getting Donovan Mitchell back tonight, but they still don't have Rudy Gobert. So Hassan Whiteside at $6,400. I think this is a pretty good matchup against the Brooklyn Nets. The Nets defense, I think, is a little below average at this point. It's kind of hard to say with their players changing so often. Kyrie Irving only playing in half the games, and their defense has gotten worse without Kevin Durant. But Whiteside should be able to get the minutes, assuming he's out there. He's listed questionable too. So part of the reason I like this play is because we may not find out that Whiteside is going to go until well after lock. This is a 9 o'clock game. So the ownership is going to be low if Whiteside ends up being ruled in much later, because most people will be a little bit scared off by that with him being questionable. So this price, I think, is still a little bit too low for Whiteside, and he's someone who definitely can go for a big points and rebounds game, block shots and everything. And the Jazz have been losing a lot, and I think if he's healthy, they probably do want to play him a lot. So this could be a lot of upside for him.
You guys are spending some cash, so what's the best value play under $5,000, Matt?
So now I'm just going right back to the Bulls because why not, right? Well, if we get White and Levine both not playing, I think Troy Brown Jr. 3,400 is probably the main guy who normally doesn't play a ton of minutes that I think steps up and plays a much larger role. But really, like, this could be a slate where we have a lot of Bulls players to consider. So I'll just get it started early because I still think there's a chance that guys like DeRozan and Vucevic could get the night off too. At minimum, though, I think Levine and White end up being out. So Brown and maybe many others could be good value plays in this range.
Garion, who's the best value play?
Yeah, I want to give a quick shout out to Frank Jackson, who's been playing probably the best basketball of his career since coming off a lengthy stay on the injury report. He's become like the bench gunner for the Pistons. And if Cade Cunningham is going to sit out again tonight, there's just a ton of usage and shots available for Frank Jackson. I mean, he paid off his value and then some on Thursday's slate. Maybe he's not capable of doing that again or doing that on 2 consecutive slates against the Boston team that's been fantastic defensively the past month. But I just see a scenario where Jackson is probably locked into somewhere between 12 to 16 field goal attempts. And that's a lot of volume for someone who's less than $4,000. Also want to say, I tried to make this float yesterday. He wasn't activated, but Greg Popovich did mention that there's a very good chance he's activated tonight. We don't know how the Spurs center rotation is going to play out, but Zach Collins, if Zach Collins is active and Pirtle's not playing, and this is a team that willingly started Thad Young over Drew Eubanks last night because they just didn't have anybody. I really think Zach Collins could have a massive game if he's active and there are injuries at that center position. So he's the bare minimum. It's a shot in the dark, but I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, well, that's what you got to do when it comes to a value play. Nick, who are you leaning on here?
I do think Garion's onto something. Whoever starts at center tonight, if it's not Hurdle and Hurdle is out, I think that's someone worth looking into, whether it's Collins or Thad Young. If it's Eubanks, I'm a little apprehensive. He's not much more expensive, but still, given what happened the other day. And Garion was onto something with Jackson, but my favorite one is Nick Claxton at 4.9K, right at the top of this range tonight, going up against Utah. And I know, sometimes you don't want to ride the coattails of a big performance, and obviously he had one of his biggest performances of his career with the Nets. But one thing that we've seen with the Nets this season is they like to ride a hot hand. They even did it last year too, both years under Steve Nash. So I'm comfortable doing that with no Rudy Gobert tonight for Utah.